Hey everyone, before we get started, I just want to make a note about my content because it's all for informational and educational purposes only. All of my content is based on generalities and some of the more common things I run into in the industry. However, it may or may not apply to your specific drilling practices. I try to cover content that will at some point involve all industrial non-oil field drilling applications, and that may include water well drilling, all types, HDD installations, tunneling, micro-tunneling, geothermal, geotechnical, minerals exploration, and any other type of drilling that is non-oil and gas. So again, the content may apply to you at this time, or we may reach something in the future that will, and we'll get more into specific industries. So that's just a note, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Mud Reports with me, Chantel Stone. Now, this is all being brought to you by SLURRYWORX. Now, we're already at episode 2, and I am really excited about today because I get to go in so much more detail about viscosity myths. So we're going to talk a little about what viscosity doesn't actually provide us that we think it does, and then we're going to talk about how does it help us. So without further ado, let's kick this off. Now, I realize that some of the things that I say, you're going to go, oh my gosh, she has no idea what she's talking about. I've always done it this way. It works for me. And here's the thing. If you've got stuff that works for you, fantastic. I am not trying to reinvent the wheel. However, sometimes we can learn maybe a little something extra, or sometimes we can figure out that maybe what we were doing was just getting us by and we could possibly do it a little better. Maybe let's make our jobs easier and more successful. And that is my goal. That's what I want to do. Now, I had said this before, if you listen to episode 1, that the thing is one of the really major properties that I run into that has the biggest misunderstanding around it is viscosity. And the thing that I run into the most is, look, I need a really thick fluid to get through my job. Thicker is better, and nobody's going to tell me differently. So that's why I want to start this episode off going so much more into detail about what are some of the myths about viscosity that we think it's doing for us. And when it doesn't work, when high viscosity and thick mud stop working for us, why did they do that? Why are they failing us all of a sudden? So let's find out what viscosity is giving us, and again, more importantly, what it's not giving us. So let's start off with this. Let's start off with a scenario. You're out on your job site and everything's going great. You've been drilling along for a while and no problems. And then you get notified that, or maybe you're the driller on site and you realize the hole's starting to collapse on you, or your tooling starting to get stuck. Your torque is increasing. Maybe you're not getting your flow back. I mean, a world of problems. So what is the first thing that you want to do? Well, sometimes it's let's make the mud thicker. If our hole's collapsing, let's make it thicker so it'll keep it open. Or if our tooling's getting stuck, we must not be cleaning the hole. Therefore, we need to make the mud thicker, right? All right. So here is where some real hard truths are going to come into these programs. And I'm going to be real honest with you. I'm not going to lie to you. Everything I tell you, I'm going to be real honest about, even if it can be contradictory to everything you thought you knew. And even if it kind of hurts a little, I'm going to be truthful. Viscosity is not a silver bullet. It is, oftentimes, it doesn't keep us out of trouble. And I would say 100% of the time, it doesn't get us out of trouble once we're there. So chasing a high marsh funnel and trying to build in really, really thick fluids is rarely, if ever, what we actually need when we're drilling. So here's the thing, we drill through a whole lot of soils. And what did I say? If you caught my first episode, the thing I start out with is drilling with properties, not products. Well, viscosity is a property, so I must need it, right? We need every property to a certain extent because we drill through all different kinds of soils. We drill through different, we call that geology. We drill through different geologies. Now, the thing is rarely is viscosity, rarely is high viscosity fluids or, high viscosity bentonite products. That is rarely what we need to get through most of the soil conditions we're in. Now, that's what I want to get into. What about those soil conditions? Why is a high viscosity not what I need? And what do I need? So we're going to kick it off with talking a little about the different geologies we go through. And what better place to start than in sand? Because I imagine most of us have encountered sand when we're drilling. It doesn't really matter if you're drilling vertically, if you're drilling horizontally, if you're installing fiber optics, if you're drilling for water, if you're especially drilling for water, if you're mining, if you're doing geothermal. It really doesn't matter what industry you're in. We run into different kinds of geologies, and sand is usually a big one. So why is my thick fluid not holding up or keeping my sands from caving in on me? Well, so here's the thing. When you're drilling through a formation that is mostly sand, rarely, actually, I would say never is a thick fluid what you need. What you need is borehole stability. Now, hang on a second, Chantel. I thought viscosity was giving me borehole stability. Actually, no, it's not, particularly in sand formations. In sand, we need more filtration control. Now, if you don't know what that is, I am going to have an entire episode about filtration control. But ultimately, we're needing to keep the water, we call it the water phase, but we need to keep the water in our mud and not let it go out into our formation, into our sand. That is what will keep the sand from collapsing. Now, viscosity does not necessarily mean we're going to have good filtration control. Viscosity is a separate property. We can have high viscosity and good or poor filtration control. We can have low viscosity and good or poor filtration control. So viscosity is its own property in itself. Having a high viscosity fluid with poor filtration control is oftentimes going to mean you're going to end up with a collapsed bore when you're drilling through sand. So it's one of those conditions. It's one of those geology, soils, formations that requires a very specific type of property built into your fluid. And viscosity is actually not the property you need for this. So we are going to learn a lot more about the different properties and how they match to geology. But just know that building a very, very thick fluid is not necessarily going to make you successful in a sand-laden formation. All right, so, sand's just one of the formations. We've got a lot more to talk about, so let's move on to the next one. All right, so let's just jump on into clay. So here's the thing. How many of us have drilled through clay? I'm going to venture to guess pretty much all of us. Here's my question. What did it do when you drilled through it? I'm going to hope nothing, because that's an optimal scenario. Hopefully you had no problems drilling through that clay. But I'm going to venture to guess that sometimes we run into clays that swell. They start swelling in on us, is kind of what we think we see. Or they disintegrate. Maybe the hole starts caving in. Or what about getting sticky? I would say that's probably the most popular one that we see, right? The most common one, at least. They start sticking to our tooling, coating our bit. In other words, it gets bit balling and we can't make a clean cut then. We start booting off. Well, yeah, that's what clay can do to us. So what do we need to do? Make our mud thicker? Well, is that going to help us? I'm going to tell you, that's actually not what we need. We don't need a thick mud to stop clay from reacting. Now, what do I mean when I say reacting? When clay that we drill through starts swelling or falling apart, disintegrating, or we call that sloughing, or when it gets sticky, that's when we say clay is reacting. And it's reacting in a way we don't like it to. We would rather it do nothing so we can get it out of the hole and we can keep our hole open. But the reality is clay wants to react, and we've got to do something to our drilling fluid to stop that reaction so that we can get the hole done successfully. We can get the bore done successfully. Now, what is that something that we have to do? Is it make our mud thicker? I'm going to go ahead and tell you that is not the property we need. Higher viscosity, increased viscosity, or viscosity at all, whether it's low, high, or anything, is not what is going to stop clays from reacting. Now, here's the thing. We need another product, another chemistry to stop clays from reacting. Now, if you listen to episode 1, you'll know a little where I'm going with this. I'm sure all of us are familiar with or run into or have used polymers. And this is where polymers shine, because we need polymers to keep clay from reacting, swelling, disintegrating, all those kind of things that causes problems. Now, where am I going with this, Chantel? How does this have anything to do with viscosity? So here's the thing. Let's say you started your day off with mixing up a very high viscosity bentonite, because that's all you thought you needed today is a high viscosity product. And then you started running into some clays and you notice your tooling's getting coated, or you notice, they're swelling in on you and your borehole is starting to, it's not as open as it used to be, or maybe it's starting to cave in. If you're familiar with polymers, you will know that the polymers you need for clay, some that are called inhibitors, those build viscosity too. So my question is, how are you going to get a polymer that builds viscosity, oftentimes high viscosity, into a drilling fluid that you already had a lot of high viscosity built in? Well, I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. You're not going to get it mixed in. Here's where viscosity absolutely works against you. Because when you start with a high viscosity fluid, and if you remember from episode 1, I said viscosity is a resistance to flow. So the higher the viscosity you create, the more resistance. In other words, it does not want to be pumped. It does not want to flow. It doesn't really want to move the higher the viscosity you get, that you make. So if you can't pump it and flow it and move it around in your mixing tank, how are you going to even get other additives, other products into that fluid? You're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to very easily. So then all you're doing is kind of making a big jelly, mucky, muddy mess. So if you've learned anything about me so far, you'll know that this is where I'm going to get on my soapbox about the low viscosity bentonites, low to moderate viscosity. And if I need to inhibit a clay, I am absolutely going to head toward that lower viscosity bentonite product, because that's going to be what I need as my base so that I can add in those inhibitive polymers that I want, that I need actually. Nothing that I want, it's all what I need. So viscosity now comes to the point of, now it's actually going to harm me on the things I can't do further that will keep my hole open. All right, so we've kind of addressed clays, and clays isn't necessarily, running through clays, drilling through clays isn't about viscosity. It's about your need to have a low viscosity so that you can use other products to inhibit those clays. Now, we've still got one more, and this next one, it's a big one because it is absolutely going to highlight the misunderstanding around what viscosity provides and what it doesn't provide. All right, so let's talk about cobbles. Let me clarify before we get started. When I say cobbles, I'm actually talking about anything very similar or of the like to cobbles. So that could be gravels or pebbles or river rock. I mean, we call them all different kinds of things, and they're of different sizes and densities. But really, what I'm talking about is a type of formation that is similar to a cobble gravel formation where there may be large spaces in between the cobbles, in between the gravels that could potentially want to drink our fluid. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here, just to give you an idea. So let's start off with the scenario. Have you ever run into a situation where okay, I'm about to drill through a section that has it's very, very porous is what we call it, but it has maybe cobbles or pebbles. And I'm worried that it's going to take a big drink of my fluid. So to stop that, I want to build a really, really thick mud. That's going to help me get through that section, and it's going to help me clean the hole, and it's going to hold my cuttings in suspension if I had to stop drilling. And then you got to drilling and you realize your hole's not getting cleaned, or you are losing your fluid, or forbid that we have to stop drilling and then your cuttings start settling and you feel like viscosity, my mud, my products that I mixed together failed me. Here's the thing. If you've ever been in a scenario like this, if you've ever felt like this when you're on a job and you just feel like I'm having a lot of trouble, I'm about to lose my tooling, I'm downtime, and I'm paying my crew, and now I'm losing money. You're not alone in this, let me tell you. And I'm sure you're not alone. This has happened to a lot of people. But here's the thing. It's not actually viscosity or your mud or your products that technically failed you. It's the fact that we really didn't build in the properties that we needed to drill through a section like this. So I really want to talk about where viscosity actually plays a role and where we really needed some other properties in a situation like this, in either a highly porous formation or a formation of cobbles and gravels or anything of the like, and so that we have a better understanding of where viscosity fits or maybe where it doesn't fit. So let's go ahead and kind of jump into, let's talk about the fact that these type of formations want to take a drink of our mud a lot of times, and we often go to a thick mud to stop that. So here's the thing. You're going to notice on the slide, I actually mention mechanical blocking. And this is different than what we talk about when we talk about a mud cake or filtration control or anything like this. I've drilled through these formations before. I have been a part of other drillers, drilling through these formations. And I have had the most success in using actually what we call a lost circulation material. I'm sure quite a few of you know about this, so I'm just going to say LCM. So using an LCM in these type of formations where we can block off the pores and stop the formations from drinking our mud will substantially help us in stabilizing that borehole. Now, one of my favorite LCMs to use is a fibrous lost circulation material. In other words, the kind that looks like you took a t-shirt and shredded it up. Now, I am not a huge fan, and you're not going to hear me talk too much about natural products that are going to biodegrade. There's a reason, because in most of our industries, biodegradable products can oftentimes lead to way more headaches and contamination of our water table or surface waters and things like that. So I'm going to move away from that. I'm going to talk about that at a much further future time. But I do like fibrous lost circulation material. And that actually, you can mix that in your mud, and there's a way to mix it. I'm, again, not going to go into that today, but there is a way to apply it, whether it's vertical or horizontal, that it will go in and it will block that formation. In other words, it'll mat up against that formation and kind of create like a matting, spider webby type of blocking, and it will help stabilize your hole. that helps a lot in keeping your mud in your bore and not letting it just, move out into the formation and destabilizing your formation a whole lot more. So that's going to help you a lot. And sometimes we need those extra additives to help us. All right. So let's talk about carrying the cobbles and the gravels, or you know what? Not even just cobbles and gravels, even large clay cuttings and things like that out of the hole. I hear this all the time. I need a really thick mud to do that. And oftentimes, the people who are telling me they want a thick mud to carry these larger cuttings out of the hole are actually wanting or trying to build in a calculated property called yield point. Because yield point is all about, I'm going to simplify this. It's all about carrying our cuttings, moving our cuttings out of the hole. And so a lot of times I'm hearing the higher the yield point, the better I can carry these large cuttings out. Well, here's the myth around that. There is a fine line, and here's, let me back up a second. What you actually need when you are trying to remove cuttings and you're working toward hole cleaning is you need a balance between yield point, which is driven by viscosity, and velocity. Now, I say a balance. Now, I'm giving you really some extra pro tips here. Here we're digging into some pretty complex topics. The yield point can't be so high, meaning your viscosity is getting pretty high, that your viscosity is so high, you lose velocity in your hole, annular velocity. Now, how does this all relate? When your mud is so thick, and I'm going to go back again, and I'm going to kind of have a little reminder. Viscosity is a resistance to flow. So the higher your viscosity, the more it resists flow. When you pump that down your rods or your drill string and it comes out your bit or your reamers, you lose velocity, you lose pressure. And it's a natural occurrence that's going to happen. And then you're trying to push that fluid back up your annular space or back out your annular space. So the further you have to push it, the more you lose your velocity. Now, the thicker your mud, the more you lose velocity. And now you're needing, but even though you may have a great yield point, you could still be dropping your cuttings out or your fluid so now static, not moving as well as it should, that your fluid is actually staying more static in your hole, not moving as much, and you could still drop cuttings out. So there has to be a balance between your yield point and velocity, your ability to pump that fluid. So I'm going to go back to the concept of maybe I don't need a super, super thick fluid. Maybe I actually need a moderate fluid. And I am going to balance the yield point I need with the velocity I can produce. And that's going to help me with hole cleaning. So, are some of these concepts coming together? I really hope they are. All right, so let's go to the last part of this. Now we're going to talk about a property that is all about, and we already kind of talked about this, right? Is all about gel strength. And what gel strength actually is the ability of our fluid to suspend cuttings when we stop drilling, when our fluid stops moving and it's sitting in our hole static. It's not going anywhere. And we want those cuttings to stay in suspension, especially something like cobbles and gravels and pebbles or really, really large cuttings. We want them to stay in suspension. So if we can't hold them up and they start falling either down on our bed or creating cutting beds, it can be very difficult to get them out of our way at that point. And so gel strength is that suspension characteristic of our mud in the instance that we have to stop pumping, which that happens to us, and it can happen to us unexpectedly. So we kind of have to build that in preparation for the possibility that something's going to go not the way we want it to. which happens a lot, right? I mean, this actually happens to us, unexpected things on a drill site. So as you can see, there's a lot of different properties. We have to look at gel strengths. We need to look at yield points. We need to look at matching and balancing velocity. We need to look at some of the, and then adding in additives, all of these things to help stabilize our bore, clean our holes so we can continue to advance, and prepare for those unexpected circumstances. And that is really what building the right drilling fluid is all about. And that's oftentimes where we think viscosity is providing us all of those things. And it's just a misunderstanding of what viscosity can and can't do. So I hope that kind of helps clarify, where does viscosity sit in this whole scenario, and where maybe do we need to look at some other properties and learn about some other properties maybe you've never heard of before today. So here's the thing. If you're building your drilling mud based on hitting a very, very high viscosity, a very high seconds per quart or seconds per liter, depending on where you are in the world, you're really drilling by habit. You're drilling by, familiarity to products, familiarity to what's made you comfortable in the past. And, to be honest, maybe what has worked for you and gotten you through. But if you've ever run into problems with the same old mix that's always worked, or with the things that you're familiar with, but all of a sudden it doesn't work, it's because we are drilling by habit. We're not drilling by properties. And look, I know I'm talking to experienced people here. You guys know what you're doing. I am not in any way trying to tell you that what you're doing, you don't know what you're talking about. You absolutely do. But there's some other information out there that could be really, really helpful. And it's things that maybe, again, you haven't heard before, or it's new and it's some things that could help you improve. Because we're all, look, here's the thing. I have things I need to improve on. That's to be said. I absolutely have still things I need to learn. And I hope I never stop learning. So I'm just here to teach things that maybe you haven't heard yet or hasn't been addressed well. And it could help you understand some areas that might be lacking that could make your project easier, could make your job go faster, and could make you more successful. Because when you can get the job done well and to your specs, and you can go faster and it goes smoother and you have less downtime, you make money faster, you can get to the next project faster, right? And that's what gets you towards success. So here's the thing. The whole point of this is I'm not discounting viscosity. It has its place, absolutely has its place. You don't want to go in there with no viscosity. You do need some. You need the right balance for hole cleaning, for velocity, for that pressures, the proper amounts of pressure occurring on your system, the proper amounts of pressure for hole cleaning. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. Guys, that's really what I'm getting to. It is not a catch-all for everything. It is not a magic bullet that's going to save the day. So, let me finish off by asking a question. As I went through the slide deck, I really just touched on individual geologies. And I want to ask the question about how often do we honestly just drill through one type of geology? I would say rarely, right? Now, I'm not saying never, because I've actually ran into drillers across the world that have said, you know what, that bore only had sand. That bore only pretty much just had clay. Sure, absolutely. It's Mother Nature. And depending on how we're drilling, whether we're going horizontal, whether we're going vertical, how deep we're going, we could just run into holes here and there that are a singularly type of geology. But what is the reality here? Do we ever run into the holes that, oh my goodness, you run into every type of geology you can almost think of? Absolutely, we definitely run into those. Because the reality is we often most of the time, drill through multiple types of soil. Some of them are intermingled with each other. Some of them are layered on top of each other. So here's the thing. Given that any bore we go through, any drilling project we have and bore or hole that we're drilling has multiple types of soil in it, multiple types of formation, what would that drilling fluid look like? So that's where I want to leave it with you, asking the question, what does a drilling fluid look like when you have to go through multiple types of formation? How do you need to build that fluid? And what properties will you need? I'm interested to see what you think. And that's what I love to do. Contact me, let me know, and let's start the conversation together. All right, so here we are at the end of episode 2. I really hope you found some of this content, if not all of it, useful to you. Something you found that you could take away and that could help you on your project. But here's the thing, don't forget, if you really like this content, please make sure to hit that like button. That's going to help me out a lot. That will help get some of the teachings and lessons out to more people. I already said, let's start this conversation. So leave me a comment. I will read them all and I will try to respond to as many as possible. I look forward to having a conversation about drilling fluids. But you don't have to just leave a comment. Give me a call. Again, I'd love to discuss your project and see how I can help you more. And don't forget, I'm always there to set up a mud school. Pretty flexible, as long of a mud school or short, as much as you want to learn. We can go over a lot of different topics. And finally, don't forget to subscribe so that you can stay up to date on the upcoming topics that we have planned. Here's the thing, at SLURRYWORX, I am all about making your slurry work for you so that you can be more successful. All right, we'll catch you next time. Thanks.